Since everyone else on YouTube seems to be making chopping boards or cutting boards, I thought I would take the opportunity to try and have a go too. I've not yet been able to invest in a planer, so in order to make these large live edge boards, I found a supplier that could supply a large piece of French oak, pre-surfaced all round and with most of the holes and cracks pre-filled. At just over 30mm deep, I was able to cut the piece into 3 smaller boards on the miter saw, which admittedly I did neglect to film. You'll have to bear with me, I am still pretty new at this. Like most things, I did need to mix up a batch, or rather 2 batches of resin in order to fill a few imperfections that were still on the bottom surface, as these boards are sold intended for shelves or mantelpieces, so they don't tend to have the undersides exposed. Once the resin had cured, it was time to begin the long process of sanding everything down. I'm a big fan of the Ryobi 1 Plus range, and I've used various tools of theirs for years. As much as I'd like to fill the workshop with Festool gear, I think I'll need to wait a few years before I get there. That being said, the Ryobi stuff has never let me down, and I've never had to replace anything of theirs so far. It's pretty good to be able to switch to a bigger battery when you need a little bit more oomph, as I'm doing here, though I think for the amount of sanding these boards take, I will be investing in a corded sander pretty soon. Now, you'll see a lot of people online talking about the various grades of sandpaper they use. For me, I start with 80, then to 120, 180, and then 240, so just the 4. From what I've heard, it's best to avoid going finer as it can affect how well your finish adheres, although I've yet to really experiment with that myself. It is tempting to use a heavier grit sandpaper than 80 in the beginning here, just to start bringing that resin layer down, but I like to be cautious and not risk taking too much of the wood layer down as well. After all, you can't put the material back that you sand away, and it's important to try and avoid creating dips in the surface. A great method to ensure that the board is being sanded evenly is to run a pencil over the surface gently in between the different grits. Working from one side to the other, this ensures that no areas are missed, and it allows you to see both where you still need to sand as well as providing the information on when to stop and move to the higher grit. This really does take a while at this point, so it's best just to be patient and work your way through the grits one by one. When the sanding is complete, I like to actually run my hands over the surface physically, as you'll often be able to feel the imperfections much better than you'll be able to see them. As these boards have a live edge at the front, I decided against using a router bit or a hand plane and wanted to create a soft edge as possible to sort of maintain the rustic look. For this, as you can see here, it's just a simple job of running a 240 grit sandpaper along each edge and running my hands over them afterwards to ensure they felt right. There's no particular technique employed at this part other than just taking your time, ensuring all the edges are sanded evenly and trying as best as possible to avoid any flat or high spots. Now, there may be some of you out there querying why I'm using orbital sanding discs for these hand sanding parts. Simple reason is I ran out of real sandpaper, so you make do with what you've got a lot of the time. It may be delusions of grandeur on my part, but I really like the look of these boards and I think they're good enough to be on display all the time. Part of the reason I think they look good on display is the choice I make to fit feet to them. A lot of people do like feet, a lot of people don't like feet. It tends to be a split, between the population from people I've talked to. And I like to fit them because it creates a sort of floating look. It makes them appear that they're hovering in the air and it draws your eye in a little bit more. Feet are very simple. They just screw in about 2 centimeters in from each corner. Now, I have a separate video coming out on the method I'm using here, but essentially if you're without a laser or CNC and you want to have custom markings on a piece, you can use the torch paste method. It's essentially a chemical compound that burns when heat is applied directly from a heat gun, negating the need for an open flame or more specialised equipment. It does admittedly take a little time and it can be quite easy to burn the surrounding wood as well, but with patience you can actually achieve quite a good result. If using the torch paste, it is important to remember that the item in question is coming into contact with food. It will still need to be sealed. Once I've burnt this in, I give it a very, very light pass with 400 grit paper over the marking to ensure there's no residue, no carbon build-up before I then get to the stage where I apply the finish. The finish I use on my boards is a food-safe beeswax and mineral oil blend that I make myself. It's a very simple recipe and I have a separate video on how to make it if you'd like to, which I'll link down below in the description. Applying it is a very easy process. It simply requires you take a generous amount of the balm to the wood, making sure to cover all the surfaces thoroughly as I'm doing here. You don't need to worry about streaks or leaving excess product on the wood, as all that we're trying to achieve at this point is full coverage. The reason being that after you leave the board overnight, which allows the mineral oil to penetrate and the wax to stay on the outer surface, it's simply a case of buffing away the excess with a cloth, which leaves a nice shine ready for a new home and hopefully many, many years of use. Unfortunately, I did neglect to film the buffing process after leaving it overnight, which is the second thing I've forgotten to film. But again, I am new and getting used to this whole YouTube thing, so you will just have to settle for images and videos of the finished product. Now, I did just say images and videos, but really it is mostly images. Though on the next video, I promise I will film everything. I won't leave any steps out. I won't cut any corners, unless the project calls for corners that need cutting. All in all, I am actually really happy with how these boards have turned out, and I'm very much looking forward to making more of them in due course. In the meantime, I really hope you enjoyed watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.